Hey, what's going on, ADPI Nation? This is your host, Kevin Brenner, and I have an incredible guest on the ADPI podcast. This one is fun. This one's going to be really, really fun, particularly for me, because this guest, he's an old college buddy of mine. And we've kept in touch. The crossover as we've both grown our careers kind of independently, and there's some backstories, and it's going to be fun. But learning, where Mike and we've crossed over, and then seeing him progress. And he was briefly actually a student in EMRIA and in Operation Atom, the Action Takers Only Mastermind. And he took those lessons and he was asking questions and he was taking action. And then where he is today, it's just incredible. So we're going to talk about the importance of coaching and mentoring, but really it's just going to be a fun podcast with a friend of mine. And maybe you'll learn something about me if you're listening to this podcast. And I'm sure Mike's got some stories, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So Mike Scanlon, welcome to the show, man, and thanks for carving out the time.
No, I appreciate you having me. Yeah, this will be very, very meta in a kind of a weird way, because I did actually learn a lot from you. You interview a lot of people who have learned from here, there, everywhere. And of course, I've learned from other sources. But yeah, we had a lot of talks before I even got into this stuff. And so it'll be a good conversation because we've known each other for a long time. But I did learn a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now from talking to you. Like, hey, Kevin, what do I do? And I've taken a lot of that and turned it into where I'm at now.
Yeah, which is really, really cool. And we're going to get into all of that. And I mean, where to even start this story, man? I mean, God, we've known each other for, oh God, I don't even want to say it. When did it, since before 2012. So since probably like 2008, 2009,
Yep.
maybe we've known each other. So yikes, what is it, 2023 now?
No, dude, don't remind me. It's getting weird
So
now.
we've known each other over a decade now, but it's crazy because we went to University of Miami together, and I was in ROTC, and you weren't, and you were, I don't even know what you were studying. What was your degree? Because it's not what you're doing now,
Yeah,
right?
no. So I have undergrad degrees in psychology and criminology, and I actually worked with kids with autism for a while after I graduated. But, I'm glad I have those degrees. Like, not necessarily anything to do with what I'm doing now, but I feel like in general, what I learned from working with kids just makes me so much more patient, personable when I'm working, alongside other people.
Yeah. So you got those degrees, and you were really into weightlifting and fitness and rugby, and you actually, there was a brief stint where you played professional rugby in Australia. I remember I was studying abroad in Australia, and I was like, and you had found out that I was studying abroad in Australia, and then you're like, hey, I'm in Brisbane, and I was flying into Brisbane just to check out Brisbane, the city of Brisbane, because I was down in Melbourne. And you hung out with us. You met us out, and it was like the first time I'd seen you in a couple of years. It's like the most random small world thing. You're like, oh yeah, I'm in Brisbane right now. Yeah, I play professional rugby. I'm just like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was very fortunate. I was able to go over there for 4 years, and I should distinguish so nobody thinks that I'm cooler than I actually am. I semi-pro. I did make some money, but unfortunately I still had to work a Clark Kent job. So.
Okay. All right. Semi-pro rugby, regardless. I mean, I would see like the pictures and like see you played rugby at Miami for the club
Yep.
team, and it was just like crazy. And just like I remember you or other people asked me like, hey, you want to go play rugby? And then someone went out there and like they tore their ACL in like 15 minutes. I was like, pass. I was like, if I do that, my ROTC scholarship is going to go like disappear, poof. So at the time I kind of needed that, but yeah, so you were kind of all over the world, and you got these degrees, and you were playing semi-pro rugby in Australia, and then we were hanging out, and then you came back, and you came back to the Chicago area where you're from, right?
Yeah. So I came back to Chicago, really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So what do you do when you don't know what to do with your life? You go back to school, and you try and figure it out. So I studied an MBA. An MBA was one of those degrees where they were like, no business background, sure, we'll take you. So I learned business doing my MBA, and none of that really, correlated to, real estate itself. But where it did get me was I started working in business expansion for a mortgage company, and started having these initial talks with my boss. And my boss at the time, he was the one who founded the company. It was a, smaller mortgage company. They were worth about 700 million when I started. Now they're a multi-billion-dollar company. But he owned a lot of real estate, and, we would talk occasionally, and he would just answer my questions. He was super patient, super kind, and just had all sorts of really creative insights because, when you own a $700 million mortgage company, you also probably invest in real estate. And so he's very knowledgeable, kind of like lit the spark that got me interested. And, then further talks from there have kind of evolved into me, learning, getting my license, all this kind of stuff.
It's crazy. I say this all the time, but you're the average of the 5 people you hang around with most, and how your life, Mike, turned around, because I think you leaving rugby was kind of, you got injured, correct? Was that how it went down?
Yeah, I've gotten injured a lot of times, unfortunately. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. So I still played when I came back to Chicago. I still played for one season, but my body just couldn't take it anymore. But it was actually a car accident, and so
Oh,
I
wow.
was rear-ended. Sitting for 45 seconds at a red light, just looking around. Young kid. Came up about 40 miles an hour, neck, back issues, tried to play through it, but was just in pain every time I played to the point where couldn't really do it anymore. And so I just had
Yeah.
to make the decision to kind of give up on it. And that sucks when you've played for as long as I have. I played high school, college, overseas and all
Mhm.
this kind of stuff, but it allowed me to start to look into other things that I might be interested in.
Yeah, yeah, other avenues. Going back to having that mentor in the space, and just, I think there's something to be said about being genuinely curious, because there's a lot of people who probably are in a similar situation. They probably don't know it, whether they're listening to this podcast or not. But people who might work with someone who has, in this case, a lot of real estate or a lot of experience, or they know something that they may be willing to share, but they don't know, that person who has that knowledge doesn't know that someone else wants to learn about it, or like, so you have to, there's a certain element of being genuinely curious and not being afraid, and maybe having that one-time courage to step up to someone and say, like, hey, listen, I know you're my boss and all this stuff, but I'm seeing what you're doing, and I just want to learn more. Like, what value can I provide you besides just working for you? Like, is there anything that you need, that you think I can do? And a lot of the times you'll be surprised how many people say, well, there's nothing I really need, but people get satisfaction from sharing knowledge with other people, and they just want to be heard, and that's okay. So if you're there to listen, you're fulfilling, you're filling their bucket, and that's a good thing, because they're pouring into you, and and that's where you can go and take that knowledge. So it sounds like that was happening with you and your boss at the mortgage company.
Yeah, and it's crazy that you bring this up because I've got three examples in my life of like, wait a minute, what? So my boss at the mortgage company owns a ton of commercial real estate, mostly office space. He doesn't like to dabble into multifamily as much. He just likes the lower risk of commercial type tenants. But we would have these in-depth conversations about different ways that I could get involved in real estate, not having a lot of money at the time, ways that I could get involved in deals. But it is funny that you bring up, that real estate is all around you. Postmasters, I was still working part-time, just doing what was called brand ambassador work. So, I would get hired to help out at events. And
Bro, you can't do that to me right now. You gotta share the events, man, because these events have changed my life, and I've told this story to other people.
so
I'm not gonna make you tell it. I'm not gonna make you tell
Oh
if
no
you don't
no
want
no!
to.
You're perfectly fine. Yeah, no. So I worked random events, whether it was like the Candy Expo at McCormick Place in Chicago for one of the specific brands. I've worked helping catering companies. And I get paid a slightly higher rate. Be a face that works inside of the catering company for higher end events.
Let me just stop you right there. So, Mike, you are a gifted man, and as from one heterosexual man to another heterosexual man, you're very gifted. And what he is talking about, for the listeners of the podcast, he was a model, but for a lot of different applications. But it was, getting, the point is that doing those odd jobs, and getting it out there, um, and being at these events, they're like, yeah, you're a brand ambassador. That's what you do, and people will pay for that. I do, the story I love the most is the romance novel
Oh
that you
God,
did,
yeah.
and that was a stint, baby, and I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, so
Uh, And you crushed it at it too. Like, guys, this was big business. Like,
Yeah, so I guess I tried to bury that a little bit in this podcast, but
oh no, it's
but yeah. So while I was getting my master's
it's
and post
incredible.
masters, I was a model. That was basically my full time job that got me through my master's. I've been on 116 romance novel covers, so a few here and there, but.
Yeah.
It's just funny because that circling back to one of these events, I was hired, to quote unquote be a pretty face. And, I'm in one of the, locker rooms that we're in getting ready for this really high end event in, one of Chicago's richest neighborhoods, which is Barrington Hills. And I'm just talking about, hey, cause I've already had these conversations with my boss about, with the day job about, real estate and all this kind of stuff. So I start talking about it. And that's one of the things that I think is something that you should never be ashamed to do. Talk about it. You're interested in it, talk about it. And what happens? One of the people that works for the catering company, he's a full-time, just server for a catering company. He's flipping houses, and he turns me on to the Bigger Pockets podcast. That's the first time I had ever heard of it. And then, I take that same lesson and I apply it, and I'm talking to my buddy Kevin, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm involved in this ADPI thing. And I'm like, so, you have to talk about it if you're interested in it, because it's all around you, but you don't know. You can't look at somebody's face and see, hey, I'm interested in real estate. You got to talk about it. I've come across people in the gym because they've heard me on phone calls talking about real estate, and they've come up to me. It's like, oh, you do real estate? And it's like, oh yeah, I'm looking to flip houses. I met a property manager in the gym. So talking about it and just not being afraid to talk about it, because it's just something you're interested in. You could go talk about sports with the people that are around you. If you're a guy and you're interested in sports, why not real estate? Because that really genuinely has gotten me a lot of things that I didn't otherwise have in my arsenal. Talking to you about ADPI, having the Bigger Pockets podcast and all the things that I've learned from that. It's just come from being open and talking about real estate.
It's truly incredible to share. It's kind of that influence effect, and how those podcasts and the content that you're consuming, how it influences your decisions, the conversations that you have, and ultimately the actions that you take. And that's why people are listening to this podcast right now. So you're a prime example. And that's what I want to talk about next, because obviously I don't want to embarrass you too much. But I love I love the hustle. Like, whether you told me you were modeling, or you were like a bartender, or you were doing something that put you through your master's program, that's hustle, number one. And number two, that, like you just shared, that put you next to someone who was doing something that you wanted to learn more about, and you weren't afraid to have the conversation, and you had it, and you just grow from that. So for the people listening to this podcast, y'all, I mean, you've heard Eric Upchurch, and I say it all the time, Tim Kelly as well, the 3-foot rule. As annoying as it sounds and as crazy as it sounds, you should be telling, if you're passionate about real estate, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are passionate about real estate, you should be telling everyone in 3 feet around you, work real estate into a conversation. Doesn't have to be like overtly, like you're a giant billboard for real estate if you're flipping houses, or you're doing this, you're an agent or something, but just work it into a conversation casually, and you'll be shocked at how many people have thought about whether they're in real estate already, they own real estate, or they've thought about getting into real estate, because everyone knows that is a tried and true method and vehicle to wealth. So it's there, and people think about it, but 90% of people don't do it for, whatever reason. So Mike, bringing this back to real estate. So you're talking to the server at the event, and you find out, and you're talking to your mentor and your boss, who kind of becomes your mentor, right,
Yep.
at the mortgage company, and learning about this. Like, at what point, you start listening to Bigger Pockets podcast, you start listening to this podcast, or to talking to me at ADPI. Like, when did you take action, and what did that look like?
Yeah. So this is a story I haven't told too many people, but because I signed a non-disclosure, I can't say what it was. But through the modeling, I was supposed to be on a large television show back in 2019, and it didn't work out. I actually was flown to a different country to film it, and I got West Nile virus before leaving, and ended up in the hospital. That is something that was very unfortunate. But what it brought me back to is For the couple of weeks after that happened, I was pretty down because, I'm thinking about every way to find passive income to monetize, and something like that, leads to exposure through social media, which leads to monetization. That's,
Sure, sure.
it's always been kind of a rich dad, poor dad type of mentality. It's just how I got there. And what I derived from that experience was I need that passive income, but I have to be in control of it. And so what that led to was I need to start buying real estate. But for me, I didn't have a lot of money. I, was working for this mortgage company. The income was okay. It wasn't great. And so I, on the advice of my boss, decided to get my real estate license because there are so many advantages to that. And now it's not for everybody. But the ability to be my own agent, to, use my commission, for getting involved in other deals. There's a lot of different ways that you can use it to your advantage. Just even having access to, your local MLS and just analyzing deals, easier than, other sites that you could just randomly look on. And so after I was depressed for a couple weeks and feeling sorry for myself, I immediately enrolled in a course and late 2019, finished my license, joined a brokerage, and I did not waste much time. I was already under contract for my first place for myself in February of 2020.
Wow. So like from late 2019, you kind of, you studied and you got the course, you passed the test, you did all the things you had to do, and boom, you're closing on a deal for yourself. So let's talk about this deal. And what are we talking
Yeah.
about?
So I did a rent by the room condo. I
Okay.
did not have the funds to be in an area that I wanted to be in for a multifamily. I didn't have much in the way of funds at all. It was a $300,000 deal. But what I did, and this is something that I highly suggest, especially if you're just starting out, is I did 310,000 with a $10,000 credit. Different states have different, ways of going about seller credits and all of that. But I wanted to maximize my liquidity by making sure that I had my closing costs covered because I was doing an FHA 3.5% down. Now you're talking 3.5% down, but you have 2.5%, closing costs. Now you're all in for 6% instead of 3.5%. And when you're on tight margins, when you're a, first time investor going FHA, you haven't saved up a ton of money. That is a huge difference. You're almost doubling what you have to put into a deal. And so I made sure that the seller covered my closing costs with that credit. And I was just willing to mortgage a little bit more, took the risk that it would appraise, and it did. And then, I structured it in ways that made sense to me. And I've since been able to, mentor and tell a bunch of other people. To me, it just made sense that I should close on the first of the month because when you're closing a real estate deal on the residential side, your first mortgage doesn't come until the month after the month that you close. So I closed my first deal on March 1st of 2020 instead of February 28th. And people have, in the industry have even told me, oh, but you have to pre-fund your escrow account more. But the thing with me and with any multifamily deal that you're doing, if it's already tenant occupied, I had the 2 rooms rented out for March 1st. I had guys moving in literally the afternoon that I was closing, and they had already given me funds. So they had each paid $1,200 for the room. And so the ability to, have it rented out and be getting 2,400, that far and away dwarfed what I had to pre-fund my escrow account for insurance and taxes for that extra month. And then April 1st, I got more rental income, another $2,400 without paying a mortgage. My first mortgage payment then came on May 1st. And so that plus, upping my tax proration a little bit, it's all worked into the deal, but it's all aimed at maximizing liquidity. And then obviously the advantage that I had that, I had learned from my boss at the mortgage company was, hey, if you're your own broker, you're getting your own commission. And so that deal, I only put down 3.5%, but I got funds back at closing for different prorations. And then I got handed a check for 2.5%. And so I actually walked away with more money than I had into the deal. So I'm technically infinite on that deal.
That's awesome. Yeah, because it was a little bit down, and then you were able to kind of collect those commissions because you were licensed and you were representing yourself and doing this deal. So you rented by the room, which is becoming more and more popular, especially in larger cities where housing is tighter to come by and rents are really high. People are willing to do that. How did you find these
So
tenants?
my parents wondered the same thing. Where are you going to find those tenants? And that's a major concern. But in bigger cities, so I'm in Chicago, and this is one of the reasons that I chose a nice area. And I had to go for a condo again because of the funds. But my theory was I wanted a nice place in a nice area, 3-bed, 2-bath condo. And I had been looking and, watching the market on Facebook Marketplace for individual room rentals for a couple of months, literally checking every day and just looking at, hey, when something gets posted in this area at this price point, how many comments is it getting? I have no idea if these places,
Okay, you measure the
yes, because
engagement.
I have no
Ah, interesting.
ability, to understand if those are actually getting accepted, who's actually living in it. But if nobody's
Sure.
commenting on it at $1,400 a month, then I'm like, all right, well, maybe that's a little bit high. And so that's kind of where I was able to modulate my price. I was like, anything under 1,000 has 30 comments in 4 hours, 1,100, 1,200.
Yeah, like how can I get
Yeah.
into this right
And
now? Yeah.
so I found that, in my opinion, 1,200 was kind of the right range. You would get within a day, maybe 8 comments. And I was very fortunate that the sellers of the place had already vacated and they gave me the ability while under contract to show it to renters. So yes,
That's
so that was a
clutch.
very good
Yeah.
thing. And they were very easy to work with. So I got a little bit lucky in my first deal, but yeah, engagement level in that regard. But if you're doing it in another market, you might be able to just ask a local landlord like what kind of demand they're seeing. Ask a local realtor. Hey, what are you seeing? Realtors don't really do rent by the room. That data is not really available.
Mhm.
So that's why I skewed towards, Facebook Marketplace engagement. But yeah, I just found random roommates on Facebook Marketplace. And in, gosh, 3 years, a little over 3 years of owning, well, right about 3 years of owning that place, I've had a total of 2 weeks of vacancy. And it's all come from that.
That's awesome. So you're still renting
No,
by the
so
room on that
I
place?
I moved out of that place and I have since house hacked other places. But for a good year and a half, I had a little bit of turnover. But when the turnover happened, it was an immediate, like the new person moved in the next day. So I got
Oh, I
fortunate
got you.
with immediate back to back placements of tenants. But no, that place now that I've moved out, it's rented to a couple. They're renting the whole place. I wasn't going to do rent by the room anymore. It's more lucrative. It's definitely more lucrative. I was getting 1,200
Yeah.
a room, and I'm getting 2,600 for the whole place as a 3-bed, 2-bath, but still, cash flowing a pretty decent amount after expenses and reserves, and so I'm happy with it, and it's easier to manage.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's definitely easier to manage. And I think you had come in kind of into the ADPI sphere right around you were closing on this place. Because I remember you were asking me questions about this condo, and I think we did like an
Yeah.
analysis class, and we were looking at it, and I yeah, it was you had the math done and the homework done, which is really important. I think a lesson for listeners to this podcast. If you're struggling to get in, I mean, Mike, you watched Facebook Marketplace from like you had picked a strategy and everyone has their limitations, and your limitations for a lot of newbie
Yep.
investors is capital, right? That's why in the Military Real Estate Investing Academy we talk about what we talk about: VA house hacking, using your VA, buying up to a 4-unit property, which we're going to talk about next because I know you helped a client do something similar like that, and be able to go and make make something happen, live in one, maybe rent out the other 3 apartments, and really cash flow in a great way. But like, you do the math and you do the work up front and you choose a strategy and you just go with it. And that is how you get stuff done. You cannot waffle between, oh, should I do short-term rental? Should I do long-term rental? Should I do midterm? Just pick one and run with it. And usually the parameters, the if we're taking this to bowling, like the bumpers that come up, like that kind of shapes what decision you make as your bowling ball goes down the lane and towards the pins. But like, that kind of protects you and shapes that decision. But pick that strategy that works for you and just go for it. and give it a try and get out of analysis paralysis, because, there's a different ending to this story, Mike, and it's you looking at Facebook Marketplace for 3 years, looking at something and wish that you had
Yeah.
purchased something a while ago. So like that's super relevant to a lot of people that I coach, who are just like thinking like, oh man, I got to get into real estate, but there's so many different strategies. Just go with
Yeah.
one.
And it's funny because that strategy is something that I've continued. And it's something that when I looked at my analysis, it was for me. I now work in real estate, and so I don't have a lot of time. And so that initial property, it was a nice condo, vaulted ceilings, skylights, all of that kind of stuff. And I've carried that strategy over, and there is a reason behind it. It's not just like that I'm lazy. I don't want to, try to find arbitrage in a value add type of thing, but I have kept a niche of, buying A-class properties in A, B areas. And the reason for that, in my hypothesis of it, and obviously I've been doing this for 3 years, so there's going to be longer term math that needs to be done to prove out, but I have had so little in terms of my maintenance and repair costs that, I see a lot of people that underwrite, 5, 6%. The properties that I'm buying, I'm comfortable underwriting 2%, and usually that's too high. I'm buying very turnkey places. The place that I'm in right behind me was gut rehabbed in 2016. The owners put $500,000 into it, and I'm grossing something like 11,000 a month in this place, and I've had a total of like $600 in repairs and maintenance for the last year, just because there's nothing. Everything was so well done, and that's a strategy that I've used across, because that extra 2-3% that other people are underwriting for properties that are in a little bit less condition and they're getting a slightly higher cap rate, it kind of evens out a little bit, in my opinion, and it's easier for me to manage because I just capture that extra 2-3% of maintenance and repairs that then goes back into my cash flow number.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance that we investors we look at. It's like, is there a value add opportunity? Because that's ultimately the goal is to go and get a property in in C minus condition and turn it into a B condition, as the neighborhood continues to rise. You don't want to over renovate or anything like that and have like the nicest house in the crappiest neighborhood, because then you're not gonna do so well with that, because no
Yeah.
one wants to live in a crappy neighborhood. But if you can go and turn that around and add value, like, the prime example that I always share is in one of the quadplexes I bought. They had one of those old style sitting rooms,
Yep.
like in the 60s when it was built, and it was like the sitting room with the furniture that you don't sit on that. You're not supposed to sit there, but there's furniture there. Well, we converted those into an extra bedroom. And by doing that, it already had a closet and it already had a window in it. So it was just literally putting up a wall and a door. And by doing that, we were able to add a significant amount of rent, because guess what? Another person can stay. It turned into from a 2-bed, 2-bath to a 3-bed, 2-bath with a wall and a door. So like really, really simple stuff. That's something to look out for as an investor. But if you're going and investing in these older products, you're going to have more maintenance costs. So you're probably going to have less rent, and you're going to have more maintenance costs. So you really got to weigh that out. If there's no value add component, and there's no like major appreciation play that you can see and you can take advantage of, then you might want to consider getting into something that's nicer, because it's going to be less work and it's going to be about the same amount of money. So
Yeah, and nice doesn't
consider
even
that.
necessarily preclude you from, having some aspect of value add. This building, I'm adding a third bedroom in. I've got a massive utility room, and that was kind of always the plan. The unit that I'm in, I'm technically using it as a 4 unit right now. But when I move out, the guy that's down there is a buddy of mine. He's going to move out as well, and it's going to turn back into a duplex down. And now a 2-2 duplex down versus a 3-2 duplex down is a massive difference in rent that I can collect when I'm 2 blocks from Wrigley Field. I'm in a great area over here. And then not only that, but when you buy a place, I bought a very nice, very expensive place. We're talking a 7-bed, 6-bath, technically 3-unit for $1.5 million. Well, I'm only spending a couple grand to add a bedroom, but now we've got an 8-6, and I just shift up a comp bracket all of a sudden, just over a couple grand of work that is needed and the utility room, perfectly, it was allowing for that. It's going to be a 14 by 8 bedroom. And, so you can still find
Yeah.
those even in these type of, turnkey places. But keep your costs down. Your long-term costs are going to be so much lower, but there's certainly, it's going to depend on what your long-term goals are. I plan to hold forever. One day my kids and grandkids are going to be very happy when I kick the bucket, because they're going to have all of these properties. Um,
Or they're gonna be like, oh god, I got this property from 2022 and it's like 2090, and you're just like, oh god, this
that's
70-year-old
the
property is a piece of crap. But it's Wrigley Field. Who
and it's
plays
still got the
baseball anyway?
2016 kitchen. Um,
Yeah, exactly. It's got the 80-year-old kitchen.
but if your goal is a little bit
Exactly.
quicker, if you're planning to turn it over in a couple years and maybe 1031 exchange it into a bigger property, then you can't be doing this type of strategy because you're not going to add enough equity in the short term. This is more of a net worth principal pay down type play. So there's multiple strategies for
100%.
everybody depending on what your goals are.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, kind of continuing your story here, you bought the condo, and you were a newly licensed agent, and you started working. So I assume you left the mortgage company, and you went out and found a brokerage. Like, how has your experience been as a real estate
So
agent in the
I have
Chicagoland area?
really enjoyed it, just because I found that, even as a somewhat newbie investor, backtracking just a little bit, very minor story, but over that winter of 2019 into 2020, my dad lives in an older house in the suburbs, and he had an upstairs that hadn't been touched in a very long time. It's where our bedrooms were when we were kids, and he just didn't go up there anymore. They were still basically as they were left when we all moved out. And so I just said, Dad, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm just going to renovate your upstairs. And he's like, why would you do that? He's like, afraid I'm not going to finish the project. And I'm like, well, I don't really have a whole lot else to do. And so I would just, go to his house and I would just renovate his house for free. And I completely remodeled his entire upstairs just to learn, all the while listening to, Bigger Pockets and, audiobooks and all this kind of stuff. And so that experience, kind of, led me forward as well, and allowed me to, get to where I was at in, March of 2020, and, moving forward into feeling more confident working with clients, because I had consumed so much information over that winter. I think I went through about 20 audiobooks, and gosh, I don't even know how many podcasts, just countless, because I was going in between, because I wanted the base knowledge, and then I wanted the, hey, what are people actually doing to apply it type knowledge. And so even though I had just bought my first property, I just started getting rent, I started getting myself out there to other investors like, hey, I'm an investor. I do the same kind of thing that you're doing. And I'm also fortunate that I love math. I was on the math team in high school. I've got an MBA in finance. So the math I found wasn't terribly difficult. But I was just confident and sort of faked it till I made it, just talking to investors. But the numbers in real estate, if you're buying a good property, the numbers are the numbers. And if you know how to underwrite them and you're a little bit conservative on what you're underwriting, all my clients were walking away happy because they were like, oh, we projected the 1,200 rent and the numbers still worked. I actually got 1,325 or whatever. And so that
Yeah.
allowed me to start to carve out a niche, and that niche flourished really quickly, because what you find in probably any market, Chicago included, is that there will be 95, 99, somewhere in that range, percent of agents will say, oh yeah, your mortgage is 2,000, the rental income's 2,200, so you're getting 200 of cash flow.
You're making $200 a month. Oh my
And
god. Yeah,
so
that
there
drives
was
me
just the
nuts.
ability to turn around and just be one step ahead at that point of, the people that I was working with, and act as a mentor to them. It's like, hey, no, you got to account for reserves, expenses, all this kind of stuff in your underwriting. So in order to get that $200 of cash flow, you actually need to be 26, 2,700 of rental income on that $2,000 mortgage, whatever it ends up being.
Mhm.
And then as I did more and more, I learned more and more, and eventually got myself to a point where I teamed up with another guy who was in the investor niche. he had owned properties for way longer than I did. He bought a lot in 2009, 2010 after the market dumped. And, but we were both just working with the same types of clients. We were competing with each other a lot. And that in 2021, over the last 2 years has turned from us partnering up to us having 23 agents across Chicago and Indianapolis. And we were the number one multifamily sales agents in all of Illinois last year. And so I've kind of just tried to always stay a little bit one step ahead, but there are definitely times where I am not even as knowledgeable as the people I'm working with, but I'm able to map it out for them and, be the boots on the ground.
Yeah, and there's so much value in that, and everything that you just said, just from the aspect of staying humble, but also adding value. Like not being afraid to going and say and confronting that agent who is probably might have 10, 15 years more experience than you, but is literally saying the wrong thing to a potential client and say, well, actually, you should be doing this, and they're going to look at you like you have three heads because you're like, didn't you just start 15 minutes ago? But you can go and be confident, and you can present them with the facts and the math like you said, and when you walk them through that, they'll understand. Because you alluded to it, but you didn't say it. A lot of agents, I mean, you and your partner, you guys are like unicorns and agents who are actually own real estate. And so many agents don't own real estate, specifically investments. They don't own them. And so they don't understand. They might have a primary home that they live in, but they'll say, oh, I'm an investor friendly agent. I work with investors a lot. And the first thing I always ask agent in a new market that I'm looking to work with, how many rentals do you have? And if they say, oh, I don't have any personally, then that's where I hang up the phone, because I don't have time for that, because I know that they don't know half the stuff or a third of the stuff, or they haven't been through the crucible of education. They haven't been through the renovating my father's upstairs and listening to, hours and hours of podcasts and reading 20 books. Like, they haven't done that. So why am I going to try and educate them to work for me? So I love the fact that you took the extra steps, Mike, and you went and got yourself educated, and you carved out that niche. And I'm so glad that it's working out for you, and you guys are crushing it. And it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, no, it's been fast, cool. And it's all been a learning process. Like you said, I've had to stay as humble as possible. But it's gotten, kind of cool to the point where, there are younger investors that come to me all the time. The FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, is stronger and stronger. I feel like all the time. I've had lenders tell me, 10, 15 years ago, nobody wanted multifamily. But there's so many people that want it now, and the ability to help them is really cool, because I don't like selling people on anything. I like running numbers for people and then watching them, develop long-term wealth, and just over the last couple of years, just seeing people take some of the advice that I've given to them. We just had a guy who wasn't even an agent who actually made money at closing on a 4-unit that he bought a couple months ago, FHA deal. And we just worked the numbers. And, so there's ways that, we can help people that maybe other people don't have those little 1%ers on. And then it really matters, because that kid that made money at closing, he didn't have the funds to buy almost anything else. It was a $280,000 4-unit. And he was really scratching and clawing to make the money to even close on that deal. And now he's living for free and still working. And he now owns a property, and he's getting all the benefits of, principal pay on, all that kind of stuff. So, for me, it's been cool, because it's allowed me to flourish in my life and, have my net worth continue to grow. But just over time, I think it's going to get even cooler just watching other people, because you mentioned early in the podcast, you're kind of the combination of like the 5 people you keep around you. I've done the same sort of thing, not even, necessarily acting as their agent, but, just investor to investor. My 2 best friends, that I grew up with since kindergarten are both military. And one of them I did help, buy his property here in Illinois. But the other one, he's a Marine at Kaneohe Bay down in Hawaii. I say it all the time, poor guy. He's really roughing it down there. But he was initially renting. And when I talked to him about real estate around the same time that I was getting into it, I was like a month into owning my rental. I'm like, dude, this works. It works. And, so I talk him into using his VA, and I'm like, hey man, you need to do a couple of things that'll help you get there. And it's not like, he didn't have any money. He's an officer. He's doing okay. But getting his closing costs covered, his lender came to him and said, do you want me to, buy down your rate? All I have to do is tack on an extra $8,000 on a mortgage. And he's buying a $600,000, condo in Hawaii. And he comes to me and I'm like, yes, that makes sense to me. He dropped his rate all the way down to 2.25 on a 30-year mortgage.
Yeah, like running the numbers, you're able to go and say like, well, let's calculate that out. Let's run the numbers and let's see.
Yeah.
And then you can do that. And the numbers don't
lie. Yeah, that's the most important thing that I want people to understand is get yourself what I call a deal killer inspector. The inspector that I use and I recommend to all of my clients, he finds everything to the point where we have more structural engineers come out from a precautionary perspective than we ever thought was possible, just because he's like, this could be maybe. And then the clients want to look into it, but that's okay with us because it's all about long term. So find yourself a deal killer, somebody who finds literally everything, opens and closes every single window, looks everywhere, looks in the vents, like, moisture checks every single stain on, every part of the ceiling where you can find something. And as long as you've done that and you get through and you're comfortable with where that property is at, if you've underwritten your numbers and you've got good sources for where your numbers are coming from and you're a little bit conservative with what you're doing, the numbers really don't lie. You're not going to underwrite 1,300 rents because everything you've seen on the market is 1,400 and then all of a sudden you're getting 700 a month. It's just not going to happen. Yeah.
It's not going to work. Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. And I think so many people get in their own heads about that stuff. And they're like, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if this? And at a certain point, you do have to take a leap of faith. You do, but you can do your due diligence and you build that out into a process. And the more times you try and get things under contract and you fall out of contract or whatever, like that's okay because you're getting the reps in and you're practicing. And it's a real world practice. Like there's something to be said about, running the numbers and analyzing stuff and doing that. But then when you got to practice putting in offers, you got to practice structuring offers, being creative with how you get offers and how you push them through to potential sellers and figuring out what that seller wants, why they're selling in the first place, and see if you can scratch that itch in a creative way. That helps both of you. I mean, there's so many ways to win in real estate, but it starts with buying right. And the best way to buy right, Mike, you mentioned two ways. One, run the numbers, trust your numbers. But two, have that deal killer inspector come out and find the things that you might not be able to find, because guess what? You might not be a general contractor who knows how houses are built, because I certainly don't, but I still make money in real estate. So there's just a lot of ways to make it happen, man. And I love that. Dude, so much. We've talked so much, so much, but I think it's time that I take you into the bonus.
I'm ready.
Are you ready? Okay. So, all right. So question number one. Oh, and by the way, these are the same 4 questions that we ask each and every guest on the podcast. But question number one, what book or software?
Ever since I switched, and I highly recommend this, ever since I switched from getting Venmo and Zelle payments for rent to the organization of apartments.com, it's made my life so much easier. And especially as I've grown, it's been very important. And, I'm not sponsored by apartments.com. I don't care who you use, but honestly, like the ability to have all of my tenants on their, automatic ACH withdrawal on the first of the month, a couple days later, it goes into my account. I keep pictures of every single unit. So the second that I have a vacancy, I just toggle over and all of a sudden it's on the market again. They run credit checks, background checks, and it's all for free. So that has just made my life so much easier. It reminds me when leases are coming due, because I can't track that stuff in my head anymore at this point. It's just kind of an all-in software for managing my rentals. You can track expenses, all that kind of stuff, and it's free to landlords.
That's awesome. So especially if you're self-managing, and that's incredible. Question number 2 for you. Who's your biggest hero?
It's kind of a tough one, because I've, tried to take little bits from, a bunch of different people in my life and not, strictly idolize, one person here or there. But I think one of the people that I get, my work ethic from is my mom, and her influence in terms of like the way that I've tried to, always stay driven. When I was 9 years old, had never been to college. She was 33 years old, 4 kids, single, just gone through a second divorce. She put herself through 2 years of nursing school back in the day when you could have an associate's degree and get a job in a hospital. I think it's still possible, but they favor bachelors. Um, did that, worked as a nurse for a very long time, furthered on and got her bachelor's. Then a couple of years later, she got her master's, and now she has her doctoral degree in nursing. She runs a nursing program. And this is all ever since I was a kid. Like I said, when I was 8 years old, she was working overnights, making $2 an hour at a gas station that was, 2 blocks from our house. And now she lives in a very nice house on half an acre and is the director of a nursing program. So I've tried to get my drive and, from her. And I think I've inherently just maintained that never stop attitude.
Yeah. And that's that's the level of drive that's going to make it or break it for you in really in anything, because everyone at some point does become complacent. But when you're starting out in whether it's real estate or your military career or whatever, but having that drive that is intrinsically motivated and not extrinsically motivated by like money or fame or whatever, but having that intrinsic motivation you're going to find much more success. And even bringing this conversation full circle, when you were bummed about when you got sick and you weren't able to participate in that show that was going to give you a bunch of engagement and a bunch of social media stuff, that's all extrinsic motivation. But thinking about it now, that just lit a fire in you, and you have completely shaped. And I won't speak for you here, but I'd be willing to bet that you, as far as your happiness and levels of success now,
Yeah. And, I'm a lot more
could ever
comfortable
provide
than
to
I
you.
think I ever would have been as a result of that. And, I think it's a very well timed, topic because, we're speaking, right after the Super Bowl here is, when we're recording this. And I heard a quote, and I'm somewhat generalizing the quote, but Jalen Hurts talked about, how everybody goes through different levels of hardship. And there's certainly people that are going through things that are harder than him losing a Super Bowl. But no matter what your level of hardship is, it's about how you're going to react to it. And his finishing quote on that was, I know what my answer is. And I think you just got to know what your answer is. How are you going to react when something happens? Because even in real estate, there's going to be a lot of things that go wrong. You'll learn that the more, units that you procure, there's going to be things that go wrong, but you just got to see the forest through the trees, and that there's a lot more value than there is downside if you've done things right up front.
100%. Yeah. Well said. All right. Bring this back
I still
to
try to
question
work
number
out
3. What do you like
as
to do for
much as I
fun?
can.
I don't know how,
So
man.
so
Your
I
dude
do
goes to the gym
2
like 3
hours a
times a
day,
day.
5 days a week. I do take my weekends off. The amount of calls that I take at the gym, and at this point, it's just become shameless. I was talking to a seller today who wants to sell a $600,000 condo. I was like, "Hey, I'm at the gym, so if you hear any clanking, I apologize." And then we still had a full listing conversation while I'm at the gym. But it's something that's important to me, not just from an enjoyment perspective, but from a mental health perspective. I got to stay sane because in real estate, investing, real estate in general, your attention is going a million different directions. So you need outlets. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, staying active is huge. Like going outside, going for walks, runs, riding my bike. If I didn't live in Chicago, I was just on a trip a couple weeks ago to visit some old friends back in Australia. I went hiking. I went on so many like outdoor type adventures. I go indoor rock climbing, that kind of stuff. So anything that involves activity, I am just like 99.9% energy and like all the time.
That's incredible. I love that. Yeah, I'm just thinking. I'm just picturing these listing conversations at the gym. You're like you're on the bench press. And you're
And my partner
like,
knows when he hears me go
list
silent,
with
he's like, "Oh,
me.
yeah, he must be finishing a set."
Yeah, you're on some business meeting. Yeah. Hey, but honestly, I appreciate that, because there's so many people out there that wouldn't go and do that, and they would convince themselves that they don't have time to work out, or they don't have time to do this. But it is the lifeblood, and it sustains us, and our health is so important, so much more important than money ever
Yeah.
will be. Your health is so important. So I appreciate that you take it that seriously. All right, last question, arguably the most important, Mike. The if you had three nuggets for people, and you dropped a lot of nuggets already, but three nuggets for people listening to this podcast, they're military, they're trying to get started investing in real
I
estate.
think the first one is the one that I've
What do you
kind of
got for the
already
people?
hammered on, is try to maintain your liquidity as long as your cash on cash goes up. But even if not, like there's ways that you can kind of justify what you could do with that money back in your pocket. But even at the current interest rates, I think VA rates are probably in the mid fives as of us having this conversation. Regular rates are around 6. If you're buying a decent deal in a decent market, your cap rate's probably higher than that. So the less you can put down, the better your cash on cash is probably going to be. And technically it's infinite if you have no money in the deal. So if you can get your closing costs covered, if you can get a big credit, I did a VA deal for a friend of mine from the gym. She's, gotten out. She was Air Force. She needed all of the credit that she could possibly get. And I got her additional credit that we used to pay down her credit cards at closing, because that's something that you can do with the VA. But yeah, maximizing your liquidity, especially if it's your first deal, is super important. So that's first and foremost, because you never know what you're going to need it for. An immediate repair, if you just want to, feel comfortable and have it back in your pocket. For me, I have taken the advice, moving beyond my first property, to one of the things that David Green has talked about, at the latter stages of his career. He's always been kind of the Burr guy, if you're familiar with David Green. But he said in an interview that if he could start over again, one of the things that he would do is buy the biggest property that he could possibly afford. And that's something that I've done. And he said he would do that for his first 5 deals. I think that if you've got, $100,000 to spend, rather than breaking up into, 5 single family investments, I would go for the $500,000, 20% down house hack. It's easier to manage one location than 5, concentration for eventual, property management. And eventually I will apply those lessons. I'm currently, you and I personally talked about this. I'm KPing, key principling a commercial deal, but I haven't gotten into huge commercial stuff yet. But that's eventually going to be the aim, just because there's so much value in placing your money into a single asset, as long as the numbers work, obviously. And then, as cliche as it is, like, just do it. Don't be afraid to do it. If you're confident in your numbers, if everything looks good, if your deal killer inspector said there's nothing major going on, those are the key components. Is the building going to fall down, and do your numbers work?
Yep.
And as long as those two both check out, you have to take action, because if you're too afraid to take action, and I've got clients, that are a perfect example. Last year, it took them 6 months to find their first property. They were so afraid. They bought their first property. They're on number 2. And we've lost highest and best, unfortunately, because they're going FHA again. They're 2 for 2. We've seen 2 properties. They put 2 offers. So once you take that first action, I promise you, you will not be afraid to take action again. Yes.
It gets easier. It gets easier. Yeah. 100. Oh God. Yeah. I remember the first time I put my first offer in, it was like this triplex in Savannah. It was a total piece of crap. I'm so glad it didn't go through, but I was like signing the offer digitally, and I was so scared. And then I was like, what am I scared about? It's a piece of paper. It's like, but they make you think that like you're signing your life away. It's crazy. Mike, this has been incredible, man. Really, really awesome to one, catch up with you, and just bring you on the show, and share your experiences, and kind of go from military real estate investing academy student to now I'm learning so much from you. It's like the student becomes the teacher, and it's awesome, because that's what this is all about. It's all about learning, and it's about sharing. And I love seeing you find your passion, and you're really doing amazing and incredible things. Mike, for folks that want to get in touch with
you can find me on Instagram. You're going to have to type Michael Scanlon Realtor and glance over the modeling page. So I apologize if
No, you go there. Guys, you can also look at 116
so there's
romance
there,
novels
or
and see his
Michael
face.
Scanlon at the axongroup.com. Those are my 2 easiest.
And God, I mean, we laugh about it now, but you were crushing it in that part. Like, in that part of your life, like, you took what God gave you and you said, "Hey, I'm going to make this work," and you did. And I just wonder if like people, if like clients have potentially found you from they're like looking at like their grandmother's romance novel.
There are
Is that the
clients that
realtor?
know about it, and I just take it on the chin. I'm like, yep. That I've got a listing coming up for some clients who bought from me 3 years ago. They did a live-in flip. They're selling
That's
now.
awesome.
They both know, and I'm like, yep, it is what it is. That's me.
Dude, lean into that. That is, but it's so cool. I would lean into that so hard, and like, I love owning like those unique facts that we all have about ourselves. Owning that and being proud about that. That's what separates us from the masses, and it makes for interesting conversation, and it just helps break the ice. There's so much things, but yeah, you're leaning into it. I love it.
No, I
Yeah,
really
thanks, man.
appreciate it.
This has
And
been a really fun
honestly,
interview and a great
it's
time.
really cool in my regard just because it's basically 13, 14 years that we've known each other and just seeing where we were at in college. And I know we went to a good college and, so we all had good test scores, but just seeing, the come up of us and everybody around us, it's been really cool. We know all the people in our lives who've kind of gotten involved with you as well. And it's just really cool from where we were at to being right here in this moment. So I'm really appreciative that you had me.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
no stopping us
we're
now.
going to the moon.